I'm Dawn Montefusco, and this is Write Because It Matters. Today, we have Dr. Colleen Mullen. She's a psychologist and the founder of Coaching Through Chaos. Her private practice is in San Diego, California. She's also the host of Coaching Through Chaos podcast. You can find the podcast on her website and on iTunes, and I'll have the links below this interview so you'll get all the goods. Dr. Mullen specializes in outpatient addiction treatment, relationships and conflict, treating symptoms of anxiety, depression, and PTSD, and enjoys helping her clients work through transitions in their lives. Her podcast presents twice monthly interviews with guest experts designed, and I love this, to inspire, motivate, and empower you. She's also a contributing writer on several large sites, including Psych Central, Success.com, and Everyday Power Blog, and we'll talk about that in the interview. She's basically like a Renaissance woman, and I love her. So we'll let you take it away, Colleen. How about just tell us a little bit about your business, Coaching Through Chaos, and from what I understand, I know you get asked this a lot, but I think it's about chaos theory. So do you mean that from chaos comes order?
Yes, in a sense. The idea is a little bit more complex than that, but what it means is that you must go through being uncomfortable, being anxious, feeling like you're not ready for it, as you move through behavior changes or emotional changes to get on the other side of that so that you really make lasting changes. And it was born out of my studies in chaos theory, and it does use aspects of chaos theory as a way of mapping a person through change. So there's a way that you can actually see the process of it's called the chaotic transitory period, when a person would start feeling that real uncomfortableness. You know, if you quit smoking, you might be on a roll for 2-3 months, and then you have a really stressful day, and you really have to make sure something, really terrible happens that really takes you down. You have to be able to go, you know what? A cigarette is not going to help me feel any better, or a drink if we're doing addiction work, and that's how we start kind of pushing that envelope of being uncomfortable, which really sets off our internal chaos. And sticking with that, though, allows a person to understand that they can survive that, and they can turn out with a lasting change on the other side of that chaotic period.
That's awesome. You did a great job describing it. It's funny, I'm sure you've heard a lot of writers are drinkers.
Heard that?
There's that. But also I feel like with writing, and we'll get to the writer's block aspect of it, but there is like you were talking about, a vulnerability in writing, at least the writing I coach on, which is nonfiction and memoir, and with blog writing in terms of your own personal life.
Yeah.
So, you have written posts about your life, and you've been on interviews too, telling your story. But in terms of writing, what blocks have you had to overcome to feel comfortable putting yourself out there? And I think with the written word, it's sort of solid. It's a little different.
Right, and you put it out there, and then it's there, and it has a life of its own on the internet. And I should say I'm a contributing writer to Everyday Power Blog, and I submit articles to Psych Central and other sites, and they get up there. So they get listed on there, which I learned to do through my own overcoming of my own anxiety about writing. So when I started writing blog posts, I actually had not really written any, and my first ever blog post was put on a national website. It was for some celebrity therapist. Her name is Sherry Gaba, and she works with Dr. Drew, and everybody knows who that is. And I saw her post in a group of therapists saying she's looking for blog writers. And I thought, well, I know how to write, and I'd like people to actually read it. So I wrote to her and said, hey, I'd like an opportunity to write a post for you. So she wrote back and said, yeah, give me 300 words.
Wow.
So I did, and she used it. And that was my real first ever blog post. So I then set up my own blog, and now I get about 20,000 people a month looking at it because I have the blog and a podcast now. Yeah. But I just jumped right in. So overcoming the obstacles now happens in this ongoing basis. So I am a contributing author on a page called Everyday Power Blog, and they get upwards of 100,000 unique visitors a month. So that's a lot of people looking at your words.
Yeah.
And sometimes I write based on something that comes to my mind. Sometimes we get solicitations from the person who owns the blog that says, hey, would you like to write on these topics? And I'll jump up and say, yeah, I'll take these, 3 or 4 topics and I'll get them to you in a week. And then I sit there for days on end, not writing anything. And then I'm like, what was I thinking? So how I learned to do this, and I should say I also do this and manage a private practice and my podcast and stuff. So the writing has to get done kind of when I have time to do it. So if I volunteer that I'm going to write something in a week, I've got to really make the time, and then the words have to come out. And so I think writing with those deadlines has helped me learn how to just jump back in and do it. Certainly there are days when we sit there and we think, gosh, do I really know enough about this topic to write about it? And you have to have confidence in yourself. So overcoming my own obstacles has been overcoming those days where I don't have a lot of confidence in myself, and I'm like, gosh, why did I think anybody would take me seriously? And then the anxiety about, the words aren't coming, or I don't think this sounds good, or I don't think it reads well. And then doing the stuff I might coach my clients on is doing it on myself. And some days it may be looking for exceptions to those rules. So I'll say, okay, but that last post I wrote got a lot of good feedback, or people wouldn't be listening to the show if they didn't think that I had something to say. So kind of looking for exceptions to the rule of that it's not worth reading or listening to. And then as far as the anxiety goes, I may need to actually take a break if I'm sitting there struggling to write and just kind of ruminating and over anxiously thinking about it all. I may take an actual break and say, well, I'm going to take 30 minutes and either go take a walk, go talk to my partner, or wander around somewhere, or go listen to another show or something, and then come back to it. So little intervention techniques that can kind of distract me and allow me then to come back and sit down and start writing.
Yeah, that's great. I actually agree with you on that. Like getting up and moving the body around, and also the exceptions to the rule. That's and when I'm working with someone that's just writing a book, it's kind of hard. So I like for them to go to writing groups or to share a chapter or something it's not just me as their writing coach, but then that they're usually really good too, and they just don't have the exposure. But now we have the internet, so that's why I refer to you as the Renaissance woman, because there's lots. You not only have the podcast and the audio, but you've got the written word, and then you help people, which I imagine that, and this goes really nicely, that you get told a lot of stories.
I do. I hear lots of stories, and I've been doing the therapy work for about, I don't know, I think 13 or 14 years. So, and in private practice day in and day out for the last 8 years. So I've got stories from everybody. And I have to say before I forget, thank you for such a nice introduction. I've never thought of myself that way, but thank you. I appreciate that. It's nice. So yes, I hear all sorts of personal stories. And a lot of the work that I do is helping a person either accept that their story is what it is. And if it's a story that hurts them, their narrative, maybe they come from abuse or something like that, then we work on changing their view, their perspective of that narrative. What did they learn from it? How does it make them maybe stronger today? What did they learn about their own resiliency? And I'll look to help them shift that narrative. So, of course, narrative is about the words that they think of with themselves. So a lot of times I know you're coaching people on helping them write their memoirs and things like that. And so a lot of times I suspect people will get stuck. I mean, people write memoirs when they have a story to tell that they think other people can learn from. And that usually has some tougher moments in life that they've come through. And that can be hard to sit there and start writing about.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I coach them, I have to come from the writing perspective of the hero's journey and the story arc, right? And then I want to be gentle and have them work through what obviously is partially their journey to work through. And it's the thing that I find interesting, and maybe this is something you can reflect on, is they do come from a place of, oh my gosh, this horrible thing happened to me, and now they're in a good place. So they might actually have villains, right? They have a villain. Definitely there's a villain.
Sure.
And usually they're angry. I mean, they start off very angry. And I think that they think, to some degree, the ones that are writing about that kind of more story with a villain in it, that they're going to put that story out because they're mad. It's like they want the world to know. But when I'm working with them on the hero's journey and the story arc, it's fascinating because, in essence, you've got to have compassion for the villain. You know, a reader reading a book and you're just angry at the villain, not so much. But a reader whose heart pulls on the compassionate part of what's happening is a much richer story. And I find that they then have compassion for what, they can see it from the point of view of the villain, right, to some degree.
Yes, and how the villain got there.
Yeah, and they heal a part of themselves, and they're allowed to still tell a great story, don't get me wrong. But then it becomes, there's lots of levels to it, I would say, where they're healing and telling the story, and unfortunately maybe reliving some of it, and then letting it go. Do you get that? I would think that, again, since you get told a lot of stories, that it's sort of, we all have a hero's journey to some degree.
Yes, and what you're doing is helping the person learn to accept and understand who their villain is. And in doing that, as you said, they gain compassion for the villain, and that is a lot of the work that I do, is we talk about accepting that person that hurt you for who they are as a person.
Right.
Maybe it was a parent, maybe it was a sibling, maybe it was a boss, maybe it was someone that really, just stomped on their world one day. And you have to look at it and say, okay, but do you think that person was born that way? Do you think maybe they came from somewhere? Who do you think stomped on them? And looking at them and kind of saying, okay, well, that person maybe is broken in a part of them emotionally. And how do you put on the lenses that say, I can understand how they came to be that person in my life?
Yeah. And you, in essence, you write a new story.
Yes. And that's what you're doing. You're helping them then heal the part of them that was really hurt and seemingly damaged by that villain, and looking at it, they heal through the process of understanding the villain.
Yes.
Which helps them understand that, they weren't a bad person. They didn't deserve what happened to them. All these things that they've been told their whole life, maybe, that they didn't deserve anything good, or no one was going to love them, and things like that people come into therapy about.
Yeah, exactly.
Or that they just were destined to walk in the villain's, shoes, right? Maybe it was a parent who was an alcoholic, so they think that they're destined for this. And if the parent never got sober, they think, well, they never did it, so how am I going to do it?
Totally.
And you have to kind of look at and separate them from their villain, then get them understanding the villain, and it helps heal themselves.
And the writing is richer, I think, to some degree.
Well, and certainly because you anger is it's a really motivating emotion to have, and there's lots of ideas that anger is a representation of any number of other things. And I don't hold that it's a representation of one specific thing, but I'll say, well, what do you think is under the anger? Like, are you disappointed? Are you heartbroken?
Right.
Are you lonely? Like, what does the anger do for you?
Yeah.
And so it may fuel them into doing something new, like writing their story, which can be very therapeutic, but then breaking down that anger to look at what's underneath it. Why are you angry? Well, I'm really disappointed that this is the cards I was dealt in life. Okay, right? It's okay to be disappointed. Let's talk about that. Let's write about being disappointed. What does that feel like? What is the disappointment in? Like, okay, so you didn't get those cards dealt to you that gave you a winning hand in life, but what did you take away from it? And where are you going with this hand that you've been dealt?
I love that. And what you're saying, it's also universal, right? Like a lot of these stories, I say the private world is actually the universal world. Like when we get down to the bits of it, we're really experiencing very similar things. And I think that's how we connect.
Oh, yeah. And people like things that are relatable. They like people's stories that are relatable. And they nobody wants to be, well, most people don't want to be alone in life. There are certainly those people that thrive on being alone, but many of us crave connection with others.
Definitely.
And the best way to satisfy that craving is to know that you are not alone because you have something in common with someone else. So it's not just you put a bunch of strangers in a room, but if you put them in a room and they all have something in common, they feel connected. Otherwise, they're just a bunch of strangers in a room.
Definitely. That actually segues really great into my next question is, I've listened to some of the interviews you've done, and you also reveal, well, in these interviews, online and in written form, you reveal a lot of your personal life, which has had some abuse with the mom, and very close relationship with your dad, which is gorgeous. And you speak of it with such, there's a lot of beauty and strength in how you talk about your personal world. And I wanted to ask, how has being transparent helped your practice and connect with your clients?
Thank you, and thank you for that. And again, that was a vulnerable place for me to go to do this interview where my personal story was out there, right? Because as a therapist, we get trained not to do that. So part of me even thought when I did it, I'm like, oh gosh, is this going to hurt my business now that everybody knows my stuff? So how it works now is that people will call and they might say, I really related to something that you said or something you shared about yourself, so they want me to be the one to work with them. And I'll ask them, I'll of course thank them for being, the feedback, and then I'll ask them about what it was that they connected with. And so we will have a short connection over that, and then I will shift into, okay, well, these are the things I think I can help you with, and whether that's building their own resiliency, their own self-confidence, anxiety reduction, that kind of stuff. And then when they come into the office, we're focused on them. So my personal story may connect for some people, and they'll call me and want me to work with them. So, we'll connect over the phone about, these are the things that I can help you with, when they tell me their story and what they connected, the aspect of my story they connected with, we will talk about these are the things I can help you with. And then when they come into the office and they are now my therapy client or my coaching client, I go back into the role of, I'm here to help you and focus on what's going to enhance your life. And from there, I can't help but be myself, and I do take pride in that. I am genuine, but I don't sit there and share back-to-back stories with my clients. But certainly, if I think it helps, I'll relate something of my life to them, so that some of it is to help them understand that, a lot of times they project that the therapist has it all together and that there's nothing ever happened in our lives and stuff like that, and that we might not connect over what's going on. I will say things that will subtly let them know that I relate to some of what they're talking about, or even just share a direct story that says, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. And so I do it to help them feel less isolated, more connected, and understanding that, that although, because we all think that our stories are unique, and we're all unique in our interpretation of our stories, but many of us have very similar themes in our stories. And I think that's where we're going before, is that, the relatableness,
Definitely.
I'm not sure if that is a word on a writer's conference.
We're creative writers. I'm a creative writing major, so.
There you go. So we'll create a new word. And so I think people like to know that their story is relatable, because it takes away that stigma that they've maybe even put on themselves.
Definitely. Awesome. So, wow. Then we'll look at this. We've answered so many questions. And so just taking that little bit, I was going to say, why does it matter that we open up to telling our personal stories? But from what I'm hearing, there's a real deep sense of connection which is why I often tell people who have been repeating their story a lot and haven't been able to understand it to go to a therapist, to go to someone who can listen from that global sense. And there's a healing part of telling the story. And then, telling the story in all kinds of ways can be healing. Yeah,
and telling the story is can help with feeling connected to others. But as you're saying, the more important part of it, I think, too, becomes that it's cathartic for a person. So, sometimes when we're working with trauma, it is imperative that the person speaks their story repetitively so that they feel it differently.
Right.
So that it, gets expressed differently in their mind, but they say the words or they write the words over and over again to get a different understanding of it.
Yes.
So when you're coaching people on writing their own memoirs, writing the story, just that aspect of it is cathartic for them. So get it all out on paper.
Right.
Because most times, and today we have so many people out there that are writing their own personal memoirs, and many times it really is just because they need a place that says, here's where it's all kept. It unburdens their mind also to know that this is out publicly.
Yes.
And whether that public means like 5 people downloaded the free version of their book, or whether, I don't know, 100,000 people bought it and downloaded it. So it can be healing in knowing that they've unburdened their own self, whether you call it the soul or their own mind, about what they've been carrying around for all these years. It's now on paper, and they can kind of leave it there like a little package out on the internet, or a book that they might have, that they have, that they keep with them.
Yeah. And there was another question I had, that some of my clients, are writing, obviously, their memoirs. Even when they're doing a business book, oftentimes I ask them to put a personal story in there, because it definitely grabs people more. But on the term of memoirs, there's a big surge of people, of everyone wants to read the ordinary person's memoir these days. Kind of like reality TV paved the way now for memoir. Why do you think, I think it's semi-obvious, but from a psychological point of view, what do you think the popularity of the ordinary person's memoir is right now?
Yeah. So we're going to keep using the word relatable. Of course, it's about relating to them, but it's also it also is escapism for us.
Oh, right.
I know I can get lost in any number of reality shows that, I really never really admit to, but it's fun to escape and just go, what does their life look like? So somebody's memoir is a form of escapism, a form of learning also, right? Because for as much as we might relate, we also need to know, how did you get through that?
Right.
You know, because this is what I did, but I want to know how 10 other people did or 100 other people did it.
Yeah.
So I might read a whole slew of books on people who have really resilient stories in their life, because there's always more to learn and more to strengthen and more to do. And so I like it for that aspect. And I think many of us are fascinated with the personal memoirs of everyday people because it's us.
Yeah.
And, and in many senses, I can say, like, we've all been there kind of, and we want to know, how did you do it?
Yeah. That's great. That's great. So on just a writing, just to give us all little tips here, do you have a particular time of day you like to write? A place you like? It's always the question, right? We're always so speaking of we want to know what the other 100 people are doing out there.
Yes.
And from what I hear, so what was your style of writing, or when do you like to write? What works for you? And then you said when you got writer's block, deadlines helped, and getting up and kind of getting away from it a little bit.
Certainly.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I can't wait to see other people's answers to this as well. But so for me, when I'm really stuck, I'll take myself actually to the local library, or I come into my office, because my office is like my home away from home, and it's set up very comfortably with some of my favorite belongings here that bring me kind of like calm and peace, some artwork and stuff like that. So I'll come here when I know no one else will be here, or I'll go to the local library and pick a quiet room at the library and just write. And my goal will be that I'm going to be there for 4 hours, and I'll block it out and I'll just go. So I'll do that. My style of writing, I like to do sort of action-oriented helping posts. I don't do a lot of, in my posts, for as much as I'm out there telling my story in different interviews and things, I like to say, here's a problem, here's a few ways that people often see it represent itself, and here's some action-oriented items that they can do to tackle that problem. Yeah. Because ultimately, that's what I do in my life. I'm a helper, I'm a therapist, the things that I do. So I put out these kind of blog posts to kind of just make it more public and put out free information for people. So I like those kind of things. I am working on the whole memoir and the whole chaos theory book, two different things, academic and the other one is the personal one. And I write those in more narrative forms. But what I'm doing on a weekly basis with the blog posts is more action-oriented coaching kind of posts. That's who I am. So
that's great.
Yeah. And then I'll say exercise, like going for long walks, will totally help me get my head around what I'm going to write. Sometimes people will see me walking down the street and I'll be talking into my phone.
Yeah.
Record a few ideas because, you can have great ideas whether you're in the shower, whether you're walking, whether you're, sitting and having a cup of coffee, and it really won't matter 2 hours later if you forget them.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So I will record some ideas as they come to me too that I want to get to later.
That's a great idea. And I have learned the hard way, and people make fun of me when I say, give me something, I got to write that down and record it if I don't have my phone near me. And they think, well, you'll remember it or I'll remember it. I'm like, no, this does not work that way.
Yes.
It comes in, it goes out. And
I definitely relate to that one. And I'm definitely an idea person. And I know a lot of my colleagues, they come to me over those kind of things. They'll say, well, how did you do this or that? And I'll say, well, why don't you try these things? And I'll come up with all these ideas. But then when I want to put them on paper, if I don't have them logged down somewhere, I also carry a pad of paper with me at all times, and I do write down topics that I want to write about, things like that, so that I keep things fresh, keep things moving along, and don't write kind of the same things over and over again. At least I try not to.
Oh, that's great. Well, this has been such a pleasure. I got a lot out of it, and just remembering that really deep need that we have as humans and as people to embrace our stories and to tell our stories and to reach out and to share. And so
thanks for having me, Dawn. This has really been a lot of fun.
Oh, this is great. And let's tell us more about what's coming up next for you and any other details.
Okay. So for those looking for help, I have a private practice in San Diego, but I do coaching online.
Oh,
so
nice.
People can reach out to me and they can find me at my website at coachingthroughchaos.com. And my podcast also brings those inspiring, motivating, and empowering interviews of authors and experts, entrepreneurs, and that launches every other Tuesday, and that's everywhere that you can find any podcast, and particularly on iTunes, Stitcher, and on my website again. But that's also called the Coaching Through Chaos podcast. And then for fun, I'm launching a new show called Shrink to Shrink.
Oh,
with
cool.
another therapist, and we're going to be like psychoanalyzing specific movies.
Oh, what? That's awesome.
Yeah, we've done a few episodes so far and gotten a lot of good feedback, and so we decided to launch an actual show on a regular basis. We're going to do that monthly, and that's really for fun for us, but we think people will enjoy it.
Where do we find that?
That right now is strictly we're promoting on Twitter, and you can find us. It's at Shrink to Shrink with the number 2. And so far, you can find our episode on the movie Inside Out is there, which I think every therapist in their book has talked about.
Yes.
But we're going to do movies upcoming is going to be Gone Girl and the Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Wow.
Movies that really make people think.
Yes.
But if we can find it online, we'll do an episode on it. So we'll also take suggestions for movies.
That's awesome. Oh my God,
yeah.
I can't wait. I really can't wait for that.
Yeah, well, and on the other podcast, we have episodes coming up on how to deal with a narcissist, on how to stay zen while dating online, which is a lot of, that was a fun,
this is great.
A fun subject to tackle with the author of that book, and how to parent or how to keep your relationship fresh while you've got young kids in the home.
Yeah.
Lots of people can use some of that. So we've got all sorts of things, including personal stories of resiliency through it. So although I'm not doing a lot of writing with it, I interview people that have these amazing stories to tell, and so we feature that also on the podcast. So that's Coaching Through Chaos. That's the more serious podcast, the educational one. The other one is for fun.
That sounds so great. Oh, what a pleasure. This is so exciting.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. And it's been great talking to you, and I can't wait till next time.
Great. Well,
Okay.
thanks, Dawn. I would definitely come back. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.